As Kenyans go to the polls to vote for a president, there are fears of a repeat of the violence seen in 2007 election. Are those fears justified? Will history repeat itself? And Israel is planning to revoke the media credentials of Al Jazeera working within its borders. Why has the Jewish state chosen to do so now, immediately after the Saudi-led coalition against Qatar demanded Al Jazeera's demise? Welcome to The Point. Live from Beijing, I'm Li Xin. It's great to be back after 2 weeks of holidays. I feel refreshed and excited to be with you again. I'm also thrilled to learn that one episode of The Point with Li Xin on the China-India border standoff went viral during my vacation on the Chinese social media. Actually, viral isn't the right word for it. Within a week, public viewership of the video exploded. There was my colleague Zhou Yue sitting in for me. The viewership exploded. The content received some 120,000 million views when it was translated and retweeted by one Chinese social media account. The same content got over 1,100 million views when reposted by another account. And we do not know what is the total number of views, as the video has been carried on so many different social media platforms, but definitely more than 130,000 million. That's a record for any content made by CGTN or its predecessor in history. I'm so proud of our team for their wonderful work. On the other hand, I was also pleasantly surprised by how many people have viewed our program in China. 130,000 million. That's like 1 in every 10 Chinese. As for the reason, I think it is twofold. First, the standoff between China and India is really closely followed by the Chinese people, so much so that when they see a discussion on it on TV or on their social media, especially involving an exchange between an Indian and a Chinese guest, they want to watch it. Secondly, the Chinese colonel told the Indian guest exactly what many Chinese want to say to the Indian government. If you do not want war with China, go away from Chinese territory. That's what the overwhelming sentiment and position of the Chinese government and general public. Call it a threat or a warning if you want, but in my eyes, it's pretty much common sense. I doubt any other sovereign country would react differently. Let me know what you think of it. You can see the entire discussion by searching on YouTube. If you don't want war with China, go away from Chinese territory. Give us a thumbs up or leave a comment. It's always great to hear what you think. Turning to our first discussion today, and Kenya has been holding presidential elections on Tuesday in a tight battle between incumbent President Uhuru Kenyatta and opposition leader Raila Odinga. But the run-up to the election has been marred by fears of violence in East Africa's largest economy. Kenya is home to more than 40 tribes, and competition for political seats has never been more serious. Uhuru Kenyatta comes from the Kikuyu tribe, the country's biggest ethnic group, while Odinga is from the Luo tribe, Kenya's fourth largest group. Many Kenyan voters are backing candidates along ethnic lines. It was ethnic politics such as this that led to a humanitarian crisis in 2007 after former President Mwai Kibaki was declared the winner of the presidential election and supporters of Odinga alleged irregularities. So, although both candidates called for a peaceful vote to maintain regional and economic stability before the election, the risks remain high. So will history repeat itself this time? Joining me for the discussion in Nairobi, Kenya is Professor Macharia Munene, Professor of History and International Relations at the United States International University, and in Beijing by Ambassador Liu Guijing, China's former Special Representative for African Affairs. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Professor Munene, let me ask you first. More than 1,100 Kenyans died and 600,000 were displaced after the disputed election in 2007. Why are presidential elections in Kenya so turbulent?
Well, the presidential elections attract a lot of interest and attention because there are emotions attached to them, and sometimes the personality of the candidate matters a lot as to how people react. There are some people who are fanatic of following, others just have to cut across the board, across the country, in selling their desires, their interests, and in order to be elected in Kenya, one has to penetrate every corner of the republic in terms of believability and trustworthiness. So when the people go to vote, they vote their interest, personal interest, community interest, and of course who they feel safe with or they do not feel threatened by. That has happened many times, and even in this particular election there is that element of people voting not so much tribal line that has been overemphasized, but voting interest.
Okay,
wins,
Ambassador Liu, let me get the
in
perspective from Ambassador Liu here. According to your experience, although Professor Munene said it's not so much along ethnic lines, what is your experience from serving 2 times many years in African countries and also in Kenya as well? How big a role does ethnicity or tribal line play in elections in Kenya, in your eyes?
I think in the modern Kenyan history, politics has been well associated with political violence as well as with tribal lines, because in Kenya there are no clear-cut majority of the tribals. And this time the election is closely contended. It's actually a neck-to-neck run. For Uhuru Kenyatta, if he loses this election, that will be unprecedented in Kenya modern history, that he cannot get the second term. And for Raila Odinga, since he's already 72, and this is 4th time for him to contend the presidency, and he cannot lose this one. So I think that is the background.
How much is the ethnicity factor played in here in this election, Ambassador Liu?
Well, I think this multi-party election in Kenya, as well as in many African countries, is not a kind of mature mechanism that is, I mean, basically related with the political reality, because the country has not got a kind of majority of the middle class as in a developed world. And tribalism plays an important role. I remember that when I worked in Kenya in the late 80s, as I followed up the development in the early 90s, that is not a homegrown kind of multi-party system that is forced, I mean, by the outside world. The former President Daniel Arap Moi said that wherever there are how many tribes, there will be how many, I mean, parties. And tribalism is the cancer of Africa as well as for Kenya.
Yes. Professor Munene, let me ask your response to what Ambassador Liu says. Is the situation still like that today in Kenya or in many parts of Africa?
Well, as I pointed out, I think there's been an overstress on the ethnicity or tribalism. If you look at the demography, the picture, no single tribe can win an election. Not even a combination of 2 tribes can win an election. Yet people have won elections. They have, yes, there is an element of background. Some people are voting just because it's one of them, but they don't all vote that way. The evidence is there, they don't. But when you look at the people who win elections, they have gone beyond, they are accepted throughout the country. Because we have had instances where a politician has come up and said, all the other tribes, 41 will gang up against one, and yet they lose. What it means, and this is something very clear, is that the voters are more intelligent than the politicians who keep on talking about tribalism and tribe and tribe and tribe. And so the person who wins is the one who appeals to Kenyans directly. And when they are voting, they are not voting tribe, except for a few people. But the person they believe represents their interests.
Yeah, 2007, 1,100 Kenyans died and 600,000 displaced. We are about 10 years from that day. Do you think the factors led to the bloodshed back then have disappeared or have abated over the years? Professor Munene?
No, they have not all disappeared. And there is a misrepresentation that is common in discussing about 217. The violence that occurred was not because of the announcement of the results, because violence had begun long before the election. The evictions of people had begun long before the election. So to say the announcement of the results was the reason is a misrepresentation of fact, and it's been bought. So what we had in that time, there were institutional weaknesses. The security apparatus failed to deal with the crisis that was being manufactured. And it was being manufactured by people in the country as well as international players, because we had a lot of these, particularly the Europeans and the North Americans, who took sides and they were fueling chaos. If you read the Krieger report, that points out that there were some of these international players that were not helping the situation at all.
Ambassador Liu,
the 207 was a very complicated matter.
Sure. Ambassador Liu, what is your...
Not a tribal matter.
Not a tribal matter. Okay, that's your opinion. Ambassador Liu, what do you think of the prospects of a peaceful vote we're going to see, or potential violence, potentially violent fallout from this coming election?
I think this election today has
Yeah, Ambassador Liu, please.
Yes, this election today...
Go ahead, yeah.
This election today has got a good start. Up to now it's peaceful, but the crucial point will come when the counting started, and will the loser lose, and will the winner win it in a gentlemanship? If the loser could exercise most ultimate restraint and educate his followers not to resort to violence, and things would be better. I think the danger of coming to violence is still there, but if the leaders of both parties, NASA and Jubilee, be wise enough and put their national interests as the priority above their own party's interests, things could be getting better.
Ambassador Munene, Professor Munene, sorry, you wanted to say something. Do you want to go ahead?
Well, so far people have been voting very peacefully. I voted, and I've been monitoring. The things is going very well across the board. We also have a difference to note. This time, the security forces are well prepared for people who may have awkward ideas of creating chaos, manufacturing chaos, because problems as chaos is manufactured is not natural. Yes, there may be sporadic small issues here and there, but generally the country is very peaceful, and it is going to remain that way.
Hopefully,
what has happened is that foreign interests, they have come and they have said there's going to be chaos. So they want chaos, but they are going to be disappointed because it is not going to be there.
That would be great news. Ambassador Liu, very briefly, I have about 1 minute. What about the Chinese interest investment, for instance, in Kenya? What kind of potential complication will any possible outcome from this election have on China's relationship with Kenya?
Well, Kenya is one of the focus of Chinese investment in Africa as well as in Eastern Africa with regard to the Mombasa-Nairobi rail and other rails in the plan, and a lot of manufacturing sectors investment from China. China does hope that this election will be going on peacefully, and if there is any kind of controversies, it could be resolved through peaceful means.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We have to leave it there. Ambassador Liu Guijing, China's former Special Representative for African Affairs, and Professor Macharia Munene from the United States International University in Nairobi, Kenya. You are watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. We'll take a short break and we'll be back right after that. Israel has said it plans to revoke the media credentials of Al Jazeera journalists working in the country and close the network's office in Jerusalem. Last month, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu threatened to shut down Al Jazeera's operations in the country, accusing it of inciting tensions and violence with its coverage of the Temple Mount crisis. Shutting down Al Jazeera was one of the 13 demands of the Saudi-led coalition against Qatar. Until now, Israel has been one of the few countries in the Middle East not to have banned or called for Al Jazeera to be closed down. So what is behind this latest move? Is Israel aligning itself with the position of some Arab states? Is Al Jazeera biased, or is the network being sacrificed as collateral damage in the power politics of the region? I'm pleased to be joined from Tel Aviv by Mr. Meir Javdan Far, a Middle East affairs analyst, and from Istanbul, Turkey, Mr. Serkan Oral, former TV manager and author of several books on international relations. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. First of all, let's hear how Israel's communication minister explained his reasons.
Lately, almost all countries in our region determined that Al Jazeera supports terrorism, supports religious radicalization from Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt. All the countries that are in fact for us as Israel, there's an intention to go with them to a summit on regional, political, economic and even defense agreements. And when we see that all these countries have determined as fact that Al Jazeera is a tool of IS, Hamas, Hezbollah and Iran, and we are the only ones who have not determined that, something delusional is happening here.
Now, Mr. Javdan Far, we actually didn't hear a concrete reason being given there. Is Israel now aligning itself with the position of the Saudi-led coalition?
Well, what Communication Minister Ayub Kara said prior to that statement about other Arab countries also shutting down Al Jazeera was the reason he gave, was the reason that he stated. He said that during the recent outbreak of violence in Jerusalem, which we saw after 2 people came out of the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound and shot 3 Israeli policemen, and as a result Israel put electronic gates, metal detectors in that area, which caused even more demonstrations and then more killings on both sides. The belief was that Al Jazeera Arabic was actually propagating and supporting and more importantly provoking violence among the Arab citizens living in Israel, especially those living in Jerusalem. And that seems to be one of the bigger concerns for the government of Israel. And then, of course, he gave the justification that other Arab countries are doing it. But I think there are 2 main factors why this decision has been announced. One is that because it's believed that Al Jazeera is provoking violence, but more importantly because of domestic politics in Israel. And I'd like to add the very important point here that this is just an announcement, and from here to actual shutting down of the Al Jazeera office in Israel is a very, very long, perilous and challenging road for the Israeli government to actually do it.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But Mr. Oral, let me come to you. Israeli officials have long accused Al Jazeera of bias against the Jewish state. Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman, for instance, has likened its coverage to Nazi Germany-style propaganda. Why would the Israeli government suddenly feel it is so important to terminate Al Jazeera's presence in Jerusalem or in Israel now?
I think the timing is very important. The Qatar is under blockage, and also the Israel government is using power and violence to the Palestinians in Al-Aqsa. So Al Jazeera is giving news from the field, and when you look to the point, if the thing is the security world, it's okay, you can deal with it, but the terror connections, this TV network with the terrorist organizations, then Israeli government should show the evidence, because this happened in the past to the Palestinian journalists. They are banned to do their jobs, and now the international journalist associations are worrying about that. Who is the next? I mean the BBC or TRT or what else? So this should be more clear.
Mr. Javdanfar, what do you think of the possibility or the legitimacy of the Israeli government to announce this, at least their intention to kick the Al Jazeera out of their country, although it might take a long time, but do they have the right to do that?
Everybody has a right to express their opinion, but I think the Minister of Communication is going to find it extremely difficult to actually enact this demand that he has made. First of all, in Israel we have freedom of speech. Yes, I disagree with my respected colleague in Turkey that Palestinian journalists are not allowed to do their job. Yes, some of them who on security grounds have been stopped, but there are many Palestinian journalists doing a great job. In Israel we have a freedom of speech unprecedented compared to other countries in this region. This is one of the foundations of this country, and the current government of Israel, to do that, first of all, will face a very, very strong pressure from Israeli NGOs, from Israeli reporters. Yes, people may not agree with what Al Jazeera says, they may not like it, but Al Jazeera has every right to air its view, and we have every right to counter it. But to shut down the office of Al Jazeera, it's going to be viewed as a challenge to freedom of speech and freedom of the press, which is also another important foundation of Israel's democracy and the stability of Israeli society. And once we get over the NGO backlash, then we have another bigger obstacle on the path of the government, and that's the country's independent judiciary. Israel has a very independent judiciary. Even if the parliament in Israel overwhelmingly approves the shutting down of Al Jazeera offices in Israel, if the country's high courts find that to be in contradiction to the country's freedom of speech laws, which probably they will, then they can just shut it.
Yes.
They can shut down the government's law instead of the government actually shutting down
Al Jazeera has pledged to fight it back with legal action. But Mr. Oral, I find it interesting because this is not the first time that Al Jazeera bumps into troubles in reporting in the Middle East. Actually, Al Jazeera's Jerusalem chief commented about the network, saying Arabs have criticized Al Jazeera for being pro-Israeli and Israelis have criticized us for being pro-Arab. We have been accused of being Islamist in the West and of being pro-West among Islamists. Government have said we are pro-rebel, and rebels say we are pro-government. So what is the problem with Al Jazeera? Is there something wrong with what they're doing?
First of all, Israel government's plan to ban Al Jazeera's networks in Jerusalem is not acceptable at the side of the press freedom. And the Western world is asking, are they going to hide something else? Everybody is condemning, the occupied terrorists in Al-Aqsa, and the high violence is happening to Palestinians. But let me make it clear that now the first point is, I think the Gulf countries are not united, and Arabs are divided, and the end of this, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Bahrain, and Israel seems to be at the same alliance. This is interesting from that side. Some decisions are not only decisions. So, the Qatar is under blockage, and this is one of the important parts of this blockage. So, at this point, I think Israel supports these 4 Arab countries against Qatar. But don't forget that just a year ago, Saudi Arabia King organized in Riyadh a big military exercise, including Qatar. They did, you remember the flags, the arms, the planes are having exercise in Riyadh, including Qatar. What had changed in just a year? That is the question, I think.
Mr. Javdanfar, how do you look at the interesting phenomenon that Israel is actually kind of agreeing with the position of the Saudi-led coalition?
I mean, God help us in Israel if we're going to start following Saudi laws on press freedom. And I can tell you it's not going to happen. But strategically, yes, there's a realignment with Saudi Arabia and other Persian Gulf states. except, well, even with Qatar, but I'll get to that in a minute, but mainly with the countries that are backing the Saudis because of the question of Iran and the concern that Iran is increasing its influence in the region. But there's another interesting angle I have to add. Qatar is an important player in Gaza, and in order to stabilize the economic situation in Gaza, Israel has been dealing with Qatar and will have to deal with Qatar and with Qatar's other ally, Turkey. The government of Turkey is providing aid to Gaza via Israeli ports. So these countries are also important. So the Israeli government cannot completely isolate them. So I think what Mr. Ayub said, Ayub Kara, the the communication minister, was in kind of justification. I think in this instance, and I'm just referring to this instance only, I think it's not being done mainly because the anti-Qatari countries are doing it. It's a side reason. But if we were talking about Iran right now, I would say yes, Israel and Saudi Arabia are realigned, but we can't completely ignore Qatar and Turkey because, as I said, they're important players in Gaza, and what happens in Gaza impacts right where I'm sitting in Tel Aviv.
Yeah, well, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Mayor Javdan Far, a Middle East analyst based in Tel Aviv, and Mr. Serkan Oral, former TV manager and author of several books on international relations from Turkey. And as usual, here is my last point. I would like to make a point on what the Chinese have experienced with Al Jazeera. At the end of last year, the Beijing bureau chief of Al Jazeera lashed out on Chinese social media against the Chinese language news channel of CCTV for quoting Russian sources in its coverage of the Syrian war. He said Russian media should not have been a credible source because it's engaged in the war. Did he imply that Al Jazeera was more objective? Emails leaked last year from Hillary Clinton acknowledged, citing Western intelligence sources, that Qatar has supported IS, which is also engaged in the war. The Beijing bureau chief of Al Jazeera also called his network a viewer media, whatever that means, in contrast to CCTV as being official media and a propaganda station. However, Al Jazeera is funded by the government of Qatar, so basically it's official media and a propaganda tool as well, according to his logic. So really stop pretending to be what you're really not. I think that's the real reason why Al Jazeera has been bumping into so many troubles in over a dozen countries. And that's all for this edition of The Point with Miliu Shin. As always, you can follow us on Twitter or visit our Facebook page using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN Live to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching, and you've got the point.